a march and suddenly has this Bitcoin treasury asset, and Bitcoin as digital wealth really does eclipse gold in the same way that the car eclipsed the horse or something like that, then suddenly, America has a huge advantage. So I think strategically, America will be well advised to have a Bitcoin strategic reserve. Yes.
Yeah. Remember, the funding mechanism in the Loomis bill is to pay for the Bitcoin by selling our gold. So if the gold's not there, there's no way to buy the Bitcoin.
It's insane. Because if they're going to sell their gold, they're going to have some kind of audit. I mean, I really wouldn't advise that, but that's a dumb funding mechanism.
Michael Oliver, what do you think?
Buy Bitcoin.
Getting off the issue of the validity of Bitcoin or cryptos, just technically speaking, whenever you have a bubble, and I think we've got the attributes of a bubble, meaning a market that's technically excessive, even if it has virtues. Go back to the .com top. By the way, we have called every major turn in Bitcoin since 2017 when it started trading futures, and we've called them well. This high, we're beginning to think is a top. Okay, a little bit of downside evidence, and we think, okay, you're at a top. Now, so what? Okay, that doesn't change the argument. It still could be valid in the long term. Gold has had many tops that have broken hard and so forth, and yet it's valid. Okay. And even go back to the .com top. Okay, NASDAQ 100 was a leader then. Okay, and sure enough, the internet bubble, which it was, everybody calls it that, was valid. The fundamental statements about it were absolutely true. In fact, it changed the world in ways that weren't even predictable then, in positive ways. And yet the NASDAQ 100 went down 82.5% in the next 2 years after a bubble top, 82%. And it took it until 2016, 16 years later, to even re-achieve that price high. So even with something that's valid, the internet bubble, it took it an investment lifetime to come back to the nominal break even, and years beyond that to get the real break even because of the decay of the money. So even if something is valid, it can still collapse and effectively wipe you out. And we're arguing
hundreds of companies went bankrupt too, so they never came back.
Yes, and yet tangential events that aren't seemingly directly connected to Bitcoin, and yet, oops, that firm went under. Why did it go under? Because of this, that, or the other. And all of a sudden, other dominoes that are secondarily and tertiarily linked to Bitcoin go under and create headlines.
Sure. So I mean, one of the most telling bubbles I remember was post 2011 when gold went to 1920 in the Greek crisis. And then the next 4 years in junior mining, all those mining companies just went totally.
Correct.
One of the most painful experiences I've ever known.
That's correct. I agree. Cool. Yeah, even valid markets can have bubble phenomenon. Usually,
even though gold is higher now than it was back then, quite a bit higher, most of those gold stocks are way below where they were then. Yes, even with a much higher gold price.
Bitcoin's been a much better investment.
In fact, our view is in 2025, the place to look is watch the mama gold, which I think is quite positive, and it is not hot at all. I suspect you could multiple by 10 from where you are now, if not more. There's certain events out there that will cause that. But the miners are the place to be. Gold, silver miners.
I've
got this theory. I've got this theory that Peter 10 years ago actually bought shed loads of Bitcoin. And
I wish I had bought Bitcoin 10 years ago.
Of course you do. Well, at least you admit it. But they say you get Bitcoin at the price you deserve. But if you bought it when you first heard about it and just embraced it rather than hating it, you'd be a much happier person.
Well, I'd be a much richer person. It's happiness is, money. They say money doesn't buy happiness.
It does.
Yeah, but I would imagine I would have sold a lot of it had I bought it back then. But yeah, I still might be holding more and selling into the hysteria. I mean, I wouldn't believe it, but yeah, I'd have more money had I bought it. I mean, I'd be a multi-billionaire, I guess, if I had held on.
Gentlemen, we're going to go to live audience shortly for questions. Before we do that, can I ask anybody has a view on MicroStrategy and the impact of MicroStrategy, $80-90 billion NASDAQ company with about half that in Bitcoin, and they were, I believe, back in November buying Bitcoin at a rate of $5 or $6 billion a week. Now it's a lot less than that because, as Michael was pointing out, where NASDAQ and NVIDIA goes, that seems to turn off the supply of money to firms like MicroStrategy. How important, maybe in the context of silver, the Hunt Brothers 7980, or any other market where you've got, your words, Peter, were a Ponzi or a pyramid scheme where you've got to keep fresh capital coming in to replace the people that are selling. How important is MicroStrategy to the Bitcoin price?
I think it's extremely important. I mean, MicroStrategy, buying over $1 billion of Bitcoin a week, kind of like clockwork. Every Monday, Saylor posts how many Bitcoin they bought. So you've got people front running Michael Saylor. I mean, if there's this huge buyer that's just going to keep on buying regardless of price. He doesn't wait for a pullback. He just buys. Yeah. So if you know that this big buyer is going to be there, well, you want to buy to get ahead of them. And so I think that he's encouraging other people to buy Bitcoin to try to ride that. But of course, this huge buying in and of itself is pushing up the price. And how is he funding the buying? It's with borrowed money. Either he issues stock in his company, which he doesn't have to borrow if he just sells stock into the market, because the stock trades at a premium. So for now, he could sell shares and then take the shares and buy Bitcoin. But he also borrows money in issuing convertible preferred stock. And now there's another common convertible, which is a form of debt, because the holders could actually ask for their money back if the price of the stock doesn't go up, which eventually they will. But for now, it's a self-perpetuating loop where the higher the price of Bitcoin goes, the higher MicroStrategy, the more stock he can sell, the more Bitcoin he can buy, the more money he can borrow to buy more Bitcoin. And so it's all feeding on itself to push the price of Bitcoin up. But eventually, just like what happened with the ETF, or not the ETF, was a Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, at one point it traded at a big premium, and I always warned that eventually it would go to a discount, and in fact, that's exactly what it did. It went to a huge discount. It got bailed out of that discount when it became an ETF, but there was a dynamic in place that caused it to be at a premium, and then it reversed, and that resulted in a discount. Well, I think the same thing is going to happen with MicroStrategy. I think at some point the stock is going to trade at a discount to its Bitcoin, not a premium. He's not going to be able to issue any more stock. I think he's not going to be able to issue any more convertible preferreds, because the people who are buying that are going to start to be cognizant of the real risk that MicroStrategy may in fact go bankrupt and won't be able to repay this, because all it has on its balance sheet is Bitcoin. And then when MicroStrategy has to sell Bitcoin to repay the debt, and well, the market is going to collapse. The bottom's going to drop out when the biggest buyer becomes the seller. I think the only thing that could bail him out right now is if the U.S. government buys Bitcoin, which I think is ironic, because Bitcoiners need a government bailout to stop the whole thing from imploding. We need to get the U.S. government to use the force of government. Like, I've never bought Bitcoin on my own, but the government might force me to do it in theory if they were to subtract. I have a reserve. But I think it's going to be a crash, and I think the ETFs are also going to contribute, because I think what's going to happen is when the people who own all these Bitcoin ETFs, and they have a bigger and bigger part of the float now, when the market starts to drop, and a lot of these people have stop orders in, and they're not philosophically hodlers, they're just trading it like because it was going up. But when you see a lot of people try to get out of their ETFs because they just want to cut their losses or they want to lock in a profit, all those ETFs now have to take those Bitcoin that they own and go into the market that day and liquidate it at the market. I don't think there's going to be the liquidity there, and there could be a complete implosion. And what's happened in the past, when there were big Bitcoin drops, all of a sudden there'd be a bunch of new tethers created to buy up those Bitcoin. But the problem is, when the ETFs sell, the buyers can't pay in tether. The buyers have to pay in actual dollars, because that's what the brokerage firms need to put in the accounts of their customers. They can't say, hey, we sold your shares of your ETF and we gave you tether, right? They got to get. So I just think that there's a complete collapse coming, both from MicroStrategy and the ETFs, when they all have to get out.
Okay, thank you. Dominic, what do you think?
I think Michael Saylor is a genius. I've met him several times. I listen to him speak all the time. He's just one of the most articulate people. He's got incredible vision. And you look at interviews with Saylor going all the way back to, the noughties. You can find old interviews, and he's just an incredibly articulate, high IQ, clever man. And what he's done with Mike